everyone, and welcome to today's online discussion on reshoring and nearshoring. While the concept is not new, reshoring and nearshoring has been in the spotlight more often over the last few years. My name is Chip Barth. I'm the Managing Director in Supply Chain for TBM Consulting Group. I will be the host for the discussion, and I have with me two experienced gentlemen, Harry Moser and David Pate. Harry Moser is the founder for Reshoring Initiative. He's a president there. He's 55 years in the manufacturing industry. Harry has been inducted into the Hall of Fame for both Industry Week and the Association for Manufacturing Excellence. Harry also, in 2012, was actively participating in President Obama's insourcing forum at the White House and has been regularly quoted in national media. He holds a BS and an MS in engineering from MIT and an MBA from the University of Chicago. David Pate is a vice president for North American Consulting at TBM Consulting Group. David has spent 17 years with TBM Consulting, where he has supported clients in a wide array of discrete and process manufacturing companies. Prior to TBM, David spent 20 years at a tier 1 and 2 automotive supplier, where he was introduced to the Toyota production system. We're going to begin today's discussion by covering some data and trends that support the growing interest in companies to evaluate reshoring and nearshoring. Harry, would you mind sharing some reshoring data to set the stage for our discussion today?
It'd be a pleasure to do that, Chip, and it's great to be here. This is some data from Capgemini, and they surveyed companies and asked them what's happening to their supply chain, and they differentiated between on the left what's happening to their supplier base, and on the right what's happening to their own in-house manufacturing. And in both cases, the numbers are almost identical. They say that comparing their current status, which right now is about 43% regional or local, which I would interpret to be North America. So regional or local, that's going to go from 43 up to 57. And in the case of in-house, it's going to go from 43 to 56. So essentially the same percentage change. That's a huge increase. If you think about that, that's like a 25% increase. And so I'd love to see it happen, but my gut reaction is it's going to be hard to increase U.S. manufacturing by 25% in the 3 years that they've given themselves. So I think the optimism is there, the plans are there, but it'll probably take a little bit longer to get there than that 3 years. But the numbers are dramatically higher than what one would have seen 5 or 10 years ago. So it's looking very good. So this slide shows what's actually happened over the years. So I founded the Reshoring Initiative in 2010, and we track reshoring by U.S. headquartered companies and FDI, foreign direct investment by foreign headquartered companies. So think GM and Toyota, for example. And in 2010, 6,000 jobs were announced coming back. It peaked in 2017 with the Trump regulatory and tax cuts. A lot of enthusiasm fell off with the trade war, a lot of business uncertainty, and then came up again during COVID and now has surged, especially in 2022, given the government incentives, the chips, the EV batteries, the rare earth minerals, pharmaceuticals, solar, all the things that the government's pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into. Companies have responded and announced significant plans. So it's as good as I could imagine it getting.
Yeah. Hey, Harry, one quick question. Do you think companies are being more thoughtful about why they have to reshore, or is it still kind of very reactive while you're seeing this trend increase over the last 3-4 years like it has?
Well, finally, the government money is helpful, but it's if the business isn't there, if the economics aren't there, the factories are going to fold. And so I think they're still doing the math. I think they're doing the math better. I know later we're going to talk about total cost of ownership. And when you read what companies are saying, when you read how they're analyzing it, they're considering all the costs, and even more so all the risks, all the possibilities of geopolitical action that could end, could just sever the relationships, especially with China. So I think companies are they're going away from business as usual to a more thoughtful approach.
Yeah, I agree with Harry. In a Harvard Business Review article last year, talked about, global supply chains being the risk and reward changing. And I think companies are no different than people. They respond to stimuli, and the math is changing. And so we're going to explore that a little bit here.
Great. With these trends and the growing interest, how does Nearshore, Reshore fit into your company's strategy? It's a bit of a rhetorical question we've got on here, which is surrounding competitive requirements in the leadership team, meaning competitive requirements are, every company has them. Okay, every company has to perform at a certain level, and there's a certain metric that's more of a priority than other ones that helps them win business. But not everybody within the organization across functions is in agreement on which requirement is a higher priority over others. And oftentimes companies try to treat them equally. They want cost, cash, and delivery all at the same time to get better. But going forward, especially when you're looking at reshoring and nearshoring, the leadership's got to have a very open discussion about specifically the supply base and its manufacturing footprint, and how that part of their process ties back into the company's competitive requirements, what makes them win. And in their simplest form, the competitive requirements simplest form, it's cost, cash, and delivery. Delivery carries a couple of other buckets around flexibility and agility, but in its simplest form, it's cost, cash, and delivery. Now, if we make an assumption that the leadership has spoken with each other very openly, they understand what their competitive requirements are, and they've decided to evaluate reshoring and nearshoring, then we've got a series of key points for us to discuss today. And but maybe we should start first with understanding importation and why the U.S. imports so much. So Harry, turn it over to you to walk us through, why does the U.S. import so much?
Finally, it comes down to price. If you go back, somewhere after World War II, the U.S. made 50% of the world's production. We made everything. We are much more dominant than China is today. And over the years since then, we gradually slipped and slipped and slipped, and largely because of price, largely because companies could go to Mexico, Japan, initially South Korea, eventually China, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, and buy things for 25, 30, even 50% less than the same FOB price in the US. And so we did a survey with Plant Moran, one of the leading consulting and auditing companies, and they asked manufacturers and distributors, why do you source from offshore instead of here? Overwhelmingly, they said price. And if it wasn't price, it was something related to price, like availability. And because they couldn't find that component here in the United States. And why can't you find the component here? Because that industry in the US was wiped out because of lower priced imports from abroad. So overall, the problem is price is too high. And then the question is, why is our price higher? Now, why is it 40% higher than China and 10, 15% often higher than Japan and Germany and South Korea? I say, as it says on the slide, skilled workforce. We have some excellent workers, but overall, on average, our tool makers, our welders, precision machinists are not as good as those in Germany, Japan, Switzerland. We don't have the apprenticeship system. We don't recruit as high a competence of person. Second, awfully important, the U.S. dollar consistently overvalued. Most economists would agree 25 to 50% overvalued, 25 to 30% overvalued, and that's huge. It just knocks your price right out of the ballpark. And then companies faced with low margins because of that low-priced import competition haven't invested enough. Where the Germans and the Swiss, every year they're putting in new equipment, more robots, et cetera. The U.S. has been, for decades, has been negligent. And the companies bear some of the fault. They've been too short-sighted, worried about this quarter's profitability instead of worrying about this decade's or this generation's growth and long-term profitability. Then I'd add also that not enough of the companies have looked at total cost of ownership, which we're going to get to. Instead, they've looked at FOB price or landed cost, and that means they've underestimated the competitiveness that they do have. So the idea here is that from say 2010, when we started, when this thing really got going, to 2019, I call it the death of 1,000 cuts. The reason why reshoring has surged so much. The companies, maybe a good example, John Gray, professor at The Ohio State University, and he found a bunch of SME, small to medium-sized enterprise companies that offshored and then they reshored a couple of years later. He asked them, why'd you offshore? The wages and the costs, prices were so much lower, we had to do it. Well, then why'd you bring it back? Well, over a period of time, the transportation, the freight, the duty, the carrying cost of inventory, the late deliveries, the quality, the communications, too much inventory, everything got so complicated, so disadvantageous that it more than overcame that price difference. And in some cases, the prices abroad went up. So for that first 10 to 9, from 2010 to 2019, it was just a series of those 10, 20 factors like that. But then from 2020 to 2023, it's been a series of frequent, increasingly frequent, massive, potentially existential disruptions. So we had a while back was Fukushima and COVID, the Thai floods, our own LA dock strike messed things up, the Suez Canal blockage, the Russian-Ukraine war. So all these things, people say, wow, that did completely, for months maybe stopping deliveries. And then hanging over it now is Taiwan, with the risk of some kind of kinetic event over Taiwan and deliveries from that section of the world being stopped for 6 months or a year or years. And companies look at that and say, wow, if that happened, we'd be out of business. We need to come up with plan B. We need to come up with an alternative and get going on it in the possibility that could happen.
Yeah, and I would just add to that 2 years ago, companies were saying, economists were saying, pundits were saying, supply chains are going to be back on track in 2 years. Well, here we are 2 years later, and they're saying it's 2 years or maybe more. And a lot of articles and information you're seeing is they're never going to go back to the way it was. So I think it's time to start examining some of the things that Harry's talking about around true cost of ownership and our own manufacturing capabilities to take advantage of the change. Problems are opportunities. So here's our opportunity.
I'd add to that I had a quote from a Paul Bingham, who's a senior fellow at S&P Global, and he said you should not depend on a steady supply of low cost from China, given what could happen geopolitically. That's just not realistic to do that. And he also then went on to say you should think of paying a little more for diversification. And I would say localization. He said diversification. You should be willing to pay a little more for diversification and think of it as a form of insurance against that existential risk if everything goes to hell in that section of the world. And so if a company's willing to pay fire insurance on all its factories, which rarely have fires, and yet they've got all their factories getting hundreds of components from China, and if they don't do something about that, then they're not being realistic.
Yeah.
Supply chain insurance. I like it.
Thank you so much, Harry. with the reshoring surging, you saw the data on Harry's charts. We just had some discussion around that. But what is the best candidate for a nearshoring or reshoring effort? Davey, maybe you could lead us off on this one here and talk through some of the points.
Yeah, I think, circling back to, kind of where we've been here in the discussion so far is that, the best candidates are the ones feeling the most pain. Companies like people respond to stimuli, and those problems that are presenting themselves in the form of supply chain disruptions, supply chain costs that we're really feeling the effect of now, really kind of raise the specter of, companies need to change how they're strategically and tactically approaching the supply chain and how they're getting their products. And so, the ones that are impacted by the unreliable supply chain, extended lead times, and then, how companies have offset that has been excessive inventories. So, for a long time, we had, through lean manufacturing, just in time, and then, had some supply chain challenges, and now we got just in case, and now we've just got too darn much. So, if you think about the cost of those things, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I've got a client who imports a tremendous amount of their products, not all their product. They make some here in the U.S., but a lot of the product they import, and they've got multiple warehouses with lots of people in them, supporting the inventory that they've got, because the supply chain is unreliable, and they've got to be able to supply their customers. And so there's a cost associated with that that's different than the landed cost. We're going to talk about that model in a moment. Another example is a equipment manufacturer. Normally they would have about 13 to 15 machines work in process, and they've got over 60, and their internal inside the factory lead time is now months, where it was several weeks or shorter, just because they've got components they can't get. So those supply chain disruptions driving production impacts, again, those are not things that are part of a price or price variance or landed cost model. So those companies are feeling those kinds of print picks, if you will, are the ones that are the best candidates. So where there's stimulus, there's response.
Yeah, so I agree entirely with David. We talk about it the same way. You look for where the pain is and find a way to eliminate pain. One of the advantages of that is that there'll be champions within the organization who will support the analysis. So if you pick parts that everybody's happy with how things are, you're not going to get any cooperation. But if there's way too much inventory or not enough, the sales department, the marketing department, if the quality's bad, but you can get allies to help you with the process, and people who will open up their minds and their books to help you do the analysis, because you have to do the analysis. It isn't, if you just pick stuff out of the air like people did when they went abroad, then it's not going to be any better than those who went abroad. Just another way of looking at it, anything coming out of China, especially subject to 25% Section 301 tariffs. So if you look at the tariffs Trump put on, the biggest block of them are 25%. And if you throw that 25% into the mix, and then look at all the regular duty freight stuff going on, and then say, and there's a risk we're not going to get it, then that makes that kind of thing coming out of China is an obvious place to start. If there's highly volatile demand, then a short delivery from somewhere 200 miles away obviously makes more sense than something that's 5,000, 8,000 miles away. If the ratio of freight cost to labor cost is high, then local starts to make more sense.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have to make sure you've got component availability. So if you want to, like Steve Jobs, they asked him, why don't you make the iPhone here? And he said, well, not enough of the components are available here. You have to import all the components. And if you're going to import them, you might as well import them in the cell phone. So you got to look and make sure you've got those components. Otherwise, it's going to make that startup a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a nice slide. I think a lady put it out. It was at the World Economic Forum, and I think she incorporates a lot of what we're saying. She says the philosophy of supply chain is going from the left to the right hand. It's like the before and the after. So the green says companies used to worry about saving pennies on low-priced components. And now they're worried about making sure they have all the components so they can ship the assembled product and make their tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of profit by shipping. So it's like take care of the big things and stop worrying so much about the little things. Make sure you've got them, but don't worry so much about whether you're saving a few pennies on them. And the best way to make sure you've got them is to source them locally or in the continent, or at least from your allies, rather than from sources that might not be as dependable. So I think this philosophy is rather insightful.
So it's really great insight on the cost versus revenue. And for those of you that have been in supply chain or operations for a long time, can maybe resonate to that sort of shift in the trend there. But what other criteria should be considered when you're evaluating the reshoring, nearshoring?
So I recommend total cost of ownership. So we've been pushing that for a long time. I wrote something called the TCO estimator, which is online, free to use on our website, and it looks at all current period costs, everything that's going to hit you now, but also risks for the future. For example, stocking out. So in retail, the loss due to stocking out, the annual loss due to stocking out and overstocking is $250 billion per year. Wow. And so that doesn't appear in that landed cost calculation, but it sure appears in your P&L and your balance sheet. The risk of disruption, the cost of quality, which can be, it's no good, I'm not going to use it, or it can be, I shipped the assembled product and it failed and I have warranty costs going on, killing me. So we're convinced that total cost is the key, and total cost includes everything. If you can think of a factor that might influence your decision, we say quantify it, put some value on it, maybe not a crazy high value, but some kind of value on it, plus or minus, and build it into total cost. Because otherwise you wind up, well, this one has lower price, and that one has quicker delivery, and this one is a better quality, and that one, and then you've got like a map with all that stuff on it. And how do you pick what's your best source? We say quantify all of them, put a value to them, come up with the total cost, make a decision.
Yeah, and I would agree with Harry. Total cost of ownership is a good model. You get your data, and it helps you make a better decision. Price or raw material price variation, or even landed costs. I hear a lot of people talk about landed costs over the years, but it just doesn't take into account some of the supply chain risk of geography, geopolitics, and it doesn't account for the impacts to the inventory you've got to keep to maintain that, the productivity impacts, the examples I gave, and it doesn't account for the service impact. And at the end of the day, if we can't serve our customers, we're not going to be in business. So that I say it last, but it's the foremost of thought. So supporting our customers is extremely important. So I think the total cost of ownership model is a much better way to think about it.
Excellent.
So this slide helps to quantify the difference between, say, looking at price or total cost. So I took the first 190 cases where users had come in, used our TCO estimator, done the calculation, all data input by them, but the algorithm from us. And the blue line is their price data. So it's the horizontal axis is China as a percentage of US. So at 100% they're equal. So you can see the blue line has a peak around 70%. So on average, or mode, China is about 70% of the US price. And then the red line is total cost. Probably landed cost would be halfway in between, something like that. So red line moves the mode up to about 85%. And then if there was in this case, I put in a Trump 15% tariff, you get the black line. So the key thing is to look at the numbers in the lower right-hand quadrant. And so based on price, the US wins 8% of the time. Based on total cost, 32%. And if there's that 15% tariff, then 46% of the time. So doing the math correctly moves you from 8% potentially up to 46% of the items where the US would win if you tried to make them here.
That's a big difference.
Good job of making them here.
Yeah, it's a big difference if you're just in your procurement and somebody says, hey, go get me a better price. But it's a little bit more involved than that if you add everything up.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked a lot of years, or the focus has been a lot on the last several years of having excellence in supply chain and excellence in sourcing. And so this behavior is what's occurred. But in the same time, I'm not going to say everywhere, but I think in a lot of companies, our manufacturing capability is atrophied. And so if those muscles can be strengthened, then that can even improve the 32 and the 46% here.
I agree entirely. And one of the advantages of using TCO, if you look at the price difference, say you can make it here for 100, you can make it in China for 70. Can you automate enough to get the US manufacturing costs down by 30%, where given that manufacturing cost is labor, burden, and material? Probably not. You get a lot of labor out, but the other thing. But if you say, if there's a 7% total cost of ownership difference, and now you've got to get 7% out of the US to be competitive, the odds just went up dramatically. The ROI on the investment just went up. So you use this both for the sourcing decision, but also when you're doing your ROI on investment decisions for should I invest here or should I invest there?
So
sorry.
So the total cost of ownership is a very interesting concept. Let's just spend a few minutes about the role of total cost of ownership and how it plays in the decision for reshoring and nearshoring. So
to us, by definition, as I pointed out before, TCO is 100%. It's everything you can think of, every cost, every risk, like the value of a made in USA label. For some products, it has significant value, things that are health conscious for the baby, and for other things, maybe makes no difference. But everything you can think of that could be influenced positively or negatively, should go into that calculation. All the cash costs, all the risks, values that are sometimes difficult to calculate, like ESG, environmental, social, and governance, are quite the craze right now. We did a study of an aluminum die casting, and by making it here instead of making it there and shipping it here, the CO2 emissions came down by 25 to 50%, and a lot of that was due to the fact that the electricity in China, which was electricity is much more coal intense than our electricity. So each additional kilowatt hour there is putting that much more emissions into the atmosphere. The Section 301 tariffs, the E for ESG is social. Most people say sort of the good of your society and the members of it. And as far as I'm concerned, the single best thing you could do for people in the inner city, in the rural areas, is give them a good manufacturing job with training and a good career opportunities, and they'll take care of themselves. They'll work hard, they'll make money, and they won't be in trouble. And so for the good of your company, your community, the country, reshoring is valuable.
Hey, now that we've got a little bit more background and understanding on total cost of ownership, David, you were talking about almost kind of flexing our manufacturing muscles in America. Maybe you can help us understand how operational excellence plays a role in the decision to reshore and nearshore.
Yeah, I think, Chip, at a high level, it's just, how as a manufacturing company, I can just become more effective, right?
Yeah.
So, I think about this as you see here, in both strategic as well as tactical approaches or thoughts. One, how do I better serve my customers? And if I can serve my customers better than my competitors do, then I stand to grow and survive where my competitors may not. So strategically, serving my customers better makes me more competitive. So competitive in terms of lead time. If they can't get it, they can't buy it, and I can't get revenue for it. Meeting expectations in terms of delivery. So when I do promise it, so reliability in addition to lead time is very, very important. Whether I am a consumer goods manufacturer or I'm a supplier to an OEM equipment manufacturer or automotive supply company, other businesses depend on me being timely and meeting my promises. And so those are critical aspects that needs to be considered. And then, the more extended the supply chain, the less competitive you stand a chance to be. The price we talked about, but the risk associated with that really drives the reliability of that supply chain up. So those are strategic things. Tactically, the unreliability interrupts flow. We talk about in the operational excellence world, tack, flow, and pull. Well, if you don't have flow, it's not going to work. So that interruption to flow creates productivity losses, and productivity losses creates labor cost, additional overhead cost, inventory cost, and can increase material costs too. Increasing the inventory means more cash is tied up in the business. And, for many years, as I talk to clients and CFOs at clients, cash is free. It's so cheap, it doesn't matter. Well, all of a sudden, guess what? It matters. It matters a lot right now. So that cash and the cost of cash is very, very important. And then, tactically, labor availability. I mean, a lot of companies across the U.S., some in some regions more than others, but across the U.S. are challenged with labor availability. So, attracting quality, high-skilled employees, and most importantly, retaining them are tactical things I've got to work on. And again, being very effective and a very effective manufacturer is how you get this done. And we'll talk more about that as we continue the series. But the role of operational excellence is to make my manufacturing processes more effective. And that allows me to compete, whether that's compete in terms of moving that curve of the total cost of ownership model to the right, or it's compete against my competitors.
I'd like to add to that from a operational excellence perspective, lean. One of my neighbors up in Maine is Jim Womack, one of the gurus of lean. And he talks about lean shoring. So he says, when you bring the work back, if you put it in the old factory with the old layout and the poor flow and not much engagement with the employees, it's going to fail, and you're going to send it away again just to a different country. And so you need to redesign the factory. You have to get new equipment. You have to engage the employees and train them well. And if you do that and you have the good flow, have things under control, it'll work much better and it'll succeed. A lot of talk about just in time. I think David mentioned it, and I was on an annual conference of AME, Association for Manufacturing Excellence, the lean organization, and the talk was: have companies gone too far? Have they gotten too lean? And people were saying, yeah, just in time seems like history. I said, no, companies have not gotten too lean. They have not gotten lean enough, because if they had been truly lean, if they'd followed the Toyota production system, what most of the Japanese companies do, they source the components locally. And if you source the components locally, you can have a lot less inventory just in time than if you source them halfway around the world and you don't know when the delivery is going to come in. So we say just in time is still live as long as you source locally and you know what your deliveries are.
Yeah, I think if you look at it historically and you go back and do the same thing you did many years ago, doing the same thing is going to net the same results, right? So, as we look at it, we have to look at automation is certainly a key component because of labor availability. But then, for the processes that I have where labor is engaged, they got to be very effective, and they got to be good places to work too. It can't be the sweatshop of old, right? So all those things are components that have to be worked on for this to be successful. But the payoff is not only in today's productivity, to today's competitive, it lays the groundwork of where companies can go in the future.
I'd like to build on what David just said. If you think of a worker and say they're in a company and the company is consistently sending work off to offshore and shutting down facilities and departments and so on, well, that doesn't sound like much of a career for you. Whereas if you're in a company that's reshoring and it's consistently bringing work back and building new facilities and buying new equipment, modern equipment, training people to deal with it, wow, that's
where you want to work.
That sounds like a place I'd like to work. So
sure.
So if your biggest problem out there is labor availability, one of the best solutions might be to be known for the place in town that's bringing the work back, and therefore should be a great career for the worker for the future.
Absolutely. Great discussion. We've kind of hit on a high level. At a high level, we've hit on strategic intentions of the organization, total cost of ownership, and how operational excellence can play a role in the decision. But how would a company check evaluation results against metrics, goals, and trade-offs? David?
Yeah, I think here is you just have to look at the metrics of the business, and as you think about the total cost of ownership model, am I meeting the expectations or the goals that I set forth? Inventory turns and cash. How well am I moving my inventory, and what cash do I have tied up in the business, and what does that mean financially? The productivity impact of the unreliable supply chain and really getting at those costs. And as we understand those, we can pull the levers that will improve those. And then at the end of the day, service, being able to deliver to my customers in a timely and as expected manner. Satisfied customers will make you successful. Unsatisfied customers will not. So I think those are key metrics that you have to keep an eye on to understand whether your business is successful and should a reshoring effort be successful.
Harry, anything you want to add to that?
No, I put on the slide what I mentioned before, the Made in USA label. But in some industries, some products, it can make all the difference. If you can get 15% more for the product at retail, and if you allow for the differences in the freight and the inventory and everything else, bam, it should be obvious you can make the thing here, and you might be able to get a premium price and a bigger market share at the same time. So it's worth looking at that. Now it's tough. Made in USA label, the product has to be substantially all made in the United States. You can maybe have a couple of little bits of paint on it from somewhere else, and if you violate the rule, you can get severely penalized by the government. But if it works out, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be all subcomponents, materials, commodities, or finished goods that's going to be able to reshore it. I mean, it is at the end of the day a math problem, right? And so, but just understanding the real data, poor data means poor decisions. Understanding the real data around what those true costs are will help us make the right decisions. And some things will, need to be part of a global supply chain, perhaps from other places, nearshored versus reshored. But there's as you saw in the chart Harry expressed with the TCO, there's a lot of opportunity to do more here and avoid the risk associated with a global supply chain.
From that chart, our conclusion is most companies could bring back about 20% of what they're now importing and not impact current profitability and be safer, have insurance for the future. And that's huge. 20% of imports is millions of jobs for the country.
Yeah, and I think the economics are changing. I think it's going to be, as you think about the productivity impacts, it's going to actually be a EBITDA winning proposition.
Excellent. Well, maybe it's time to get started for a lot of companies, but to kind of wrap things up and put it all back together here around from back to the strategic part earlier, in understanding reshoring, nearshoring, being very clear on what wins your company business is of utmost importance, and getting the alignment across the leadership on what those things are. It's not to, let's say, have a disagreement at the top level, at the C-suite or the leadership level about what it is, but it's more so about being able to translate those requirements back down through your organization for the individuals that have to do the analysis, that have to put the total cost of ownership analysis together, that have to understand, maybe some of the opportunities that they have in manufacturing and operational excellence. So, that leads into knowing the concessions that your company is going to need to make for trade-offs. If everybody could have everything, then everybody would be really great at all of it and everybody would be number one. But we all know that's not the case. It's a competitive environment, and your product or your service wins on certain things. So that means other elements of what you offer are average or maybe above average, but they're not the best. And you have to understand as a business what you're willing to make.
I'd like to throw in, Chip, that the TCO methodology, this whole logic of reshoring, that some things make sense to reshore, is good for you and your procurement department, your purchasing department to make those decisions. But it's a good concept for your sales department, because when your sales department's calling on your B2B customers and your customer, maybe that you used to sell a lot to before and they've gone offshore, what a wonderful time to go to them and say, how's that working for you now? Are you concerned about your offshore supply chain? And wouldn't it make sense if we could get back together and reestablish the relationship we had 10 years ago? So for your sales team to use the TCO estimator to help convince that customer to buy from your company is an important part of the process.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last bullet point I wanted to just touch on is around proactively integrating operational excellence. I think David and Harry, both of you have made comments, whether it's lean shoring or the operational excellence on the manufacturing. David, with all the different comments that you've been able to highlight, being proactive about involving that part early in the discussion and integrating that early in the process to help your company make the decision. Like you said, David, if you just copied and pasted what you did years ago, you're probably just going to get the same result. So it's possible to plan improvement, lean, and operational excellence into what you're doing.
And one thing I didn't mention that I'll add is there's lots of tools that you can use to simulate and figure out what it's going to cost you as you make those decisions. What is that new production process going to look like before I ever make the decision? So those are things we can help companies with.
Yeah. Excellent. Any other additional comments, David or Harry, before we wrap up?
So the Reshoring Initiative, my nonprofit, offers this TCO estimator for buying and selling smarter. And we also have methods to help a company identify potential customers who are importing a lot of what the company makes and therefore might be able to convince to buy from them. So if you're out there and you're thinking about this, there's a lot that we can do, a lot that Chip and Dave can do for you. And I'd love to hear about your reshoring. If you've succeeded at reshoring, we'd love to publicize it. If you need help reshoring, call Chip, call Dave, call me. We'll get together and help you do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time today, both of you, and a special thank you to David, Pate, and Harry Moser for today's online discussion. We look forward to another great conversation of fact and experience in our next release. But for now, this is Chip Barth, and thanks again for tuning in to our online discussion.